Try it again. All right, let's see how this goes. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. And if you haven't gotten a chance to get the PDF of the oversized cheating man's PowerPoint that I made today, you can get it from the file section in the Urglaawe group, or you can get it from urglaawe.net. All right. I'm gonna get confused. I have too many links open here. All right. So if you didn't get that PDF, it's here's a link to the Google Drive, and I'm hoping that the sharing permissions work. I haven't heard from anybody if that it hasn't. So, all right. Let's see. It's 7:05. All right, so I guess we'll get started. Well, welcome back, everybody, for Urglaawe Live, nummer 4. So we're about midway through April, and which leaves us just a bit of time to finish our spring cleaning, which somehow our spring cleaning actually went backwards this week, and to get it ready for Hola's inspection at the end of the month when the wild hunt returns. Probably the most important thing to remember here is that the cosmos do not follow our linear time concepts. In other words, the hunt to me I think the hunt's already passed personally, but things go on their own, cosmic timelines. But we still do the observances in order to keep ourselves in check and to keep ourselves in line and attuned to the calendar that we function with every year. So I have a write-up about this particular topic on urglaawe.net actually, and I will link it here in a second as soon as I can. And of course, now that I'm on camera, my mustache is like driving me nuts. I think we all need we need a whole team of barbers to be ready when once this stupid stay-at-home, well, it's not stupid, it actually makes sense, the stay-at-home thing is lifted. All right, so this is the link to the Lenzbutzerei article. All right. My links are going here. Okay, so anyway, so let's talk a bit about that, because Jessica Hoy had actually asked about this last week, and so I wrote an article about it because I realized that we talk about the spring cleaning every year, and we talk about needing to finish the spring cleaning every year, but the one thing we actually never really described is what constitutes what we need to do for spring cleaning. And it turned out that in the notes I did have a pretty good set of pieces of information from practitioners. Many of these were actually Brauchers more than Hexerai, but and they provided this nice little general list. So her original question was, so we are cleaning and organizing for Hola's return. My question is here, are there specifications of what she looks for, or is cleaner than it was acceptable to her? Well, I got to tell you, luckily it seems cleaner than it was. She does accept because, well, otherwise I probably never would have passed any of the inspections for the past 10, 11, 12, 13 years. But this year it's going to pass. And so, the thing is, technically, the same cleaning rules apply to barns. Our shed's useless, which is why it's falling apart. So maybe that's her punishment. But barns or other buildings here, if you had a summer kitchen, you have to go through and do the same kinds of cleaning things for all places. But the rule of thumb that I always use: if you think you have a clutter problem, then you probably do. It doesn't all have to be resolved at once. You just have to make sure that there's a passageway passing that you kind of chop it down year after year. So when the hunt passes through to bring Holla back up to Hexenkampf, here's what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to have our floors be swept free of dirt and debris, which in a house with 8 cats, let me tell you, is not always the most simple thing in the world to accomplish. Because you can sweep the floor and 2 seconds later a cat can walk out of the litter box and you discover that there's enough sand on the floor to fill up the beaches at the Jersey Shore. Then let's see. Then next comes pass through the house to be free of obstacles. The path can have books or stuff stacked on the side if you need to, but there just has to be a straight way through from the front to the back of the house. As long as the stuff's not easily knocked over when you're walking through. And let's face it, many of us, my house is not all that large, but we have reduced stuff. I mean, if you look at my bookshelves, they're a disaster. They're cluttery, not a disaster. They're cluttery. I know where things are. But we used to have stuff stacked up that really had to go, and we finally did it this year. Items that can easily fall or be knocked over should be moved to a safer place. Hunt comes through, it's not exactly a small deal. Items that need to be donated or removed that you have known about for 3 years. Some say 6, which I support. Let's talk about that for a second. So if you have items that you're not using and you're kind of like, every year, I'm going to need this. And as soon as I throw it out, I'm going to need this. Hi, everybody. Well, if you haven't used that item in 3 years, you may not need it. If you haven't used it in 6 years, it's probably time for it to go. Get donated, give it to somebody who will use it, repurpose it for something else or whatever. But now the funny thing about 6, I made a note in there that 6 has a sacred disposal aspect to it. And we haven't really talked about this very much at all, except in one context, and that is the owls hooting outside of windows for 6 nights in a row. That is a sacred warning that somebody is about to be disposed of, which is not exactly a cheery thing, but it's the arc of the life, death, rebirth cycle, and we look at 3 and 9 as being holy numbers, but 6 is a multiple of 3, and but it's the one end of 3 is it's the sacred birth, sacred rebirth, sacred establishment, and then 6 is the sacred disposal, sacred removal, and because the more we add up stuff over time, the more cluttered our lives get, the more time it spends on our brains just trying to find things, move around things, and so it's a good time coming toward the end of the month here to get rid of the things that have been just hanging around your house for years on end. So if there's something that you've been tracking for 6 years that hey, I don't want to get rid of this, but I might need it. At that 6 years, it's time for it to go. Because if you haven't used it by then, you're probably not going to. What Sophia just said here, if you can replace it for under $20 in under 20 minutes, donate it or toss it. That's a good rule of thumb too. Because I keep a lot of stuff, and we really threw away a lot of items this year, and don't think there's actually been a single thing that I can think of that I actually threw away that I didn't need. And I feel a lot better about it. Let's see. Next would be all dishes, pots, pans, etc. are supposed to be cleaned and put away. Now that also brings back the problem of, hey, I don't have enough storage space in my kitchen. We'll put away wherever there are generally stored. Now I actually had a discussion with this one about this one with I think it was like five elderly hexoride practitioners out in Snyder County, where I asked them, I said, well, what about the dishes you're using right that day? It's like, no, you're supposed to wash them as soon as you finish using them and put it away. So in other words, like, keep your dishes actively clean that whole day. Oven clean. I mean, this one we still got to do. That would include microwaves, toasters, toaster ovens, etc. Now, the oven, of course, plays a significant role in the story of Frau Holle with the baking of the bread. And so ovens definitely have an association with Holle in a sense, so that might be the impulsion behind the rule to make sure that the oven's clean, because it would be something that she would be looking for specifically. Which we got to do that one. Clean other appliances, including refrigerators. Check the dishwasher and washer and dryer. This would also include the outsides of the chassis of the appliances. I cleaned our refrigerator during spring, well, roughly cleaned it. I'm going to go over it once again. This year, what I actually paid attention to was our refrigerator is actually really old, and knock on wood, it still helps. I mean, it still works very well. But was the seal, the area when the door shuts, the seal, the little like plastic elastic thing. I made sure I cleaned that up, and there was a lot of debris on there just from years of use because it folds up when you shut the door, and so I was trying to be very careful about that, and also in the freezer was like the area behind the ice maker, and just to try to clean this stuff up. Let's see. Oh yes, of course, Richard. I mean, but at least get it ready to go, because you really can't donate stuff so much right now. Let's see. Next up would be windows cleaned as much as you can, which, our second story windows are not particularly safe to clean ourselves. Clean the inside though, and then Michelle could probably post a picture to the group of her giant Vilcom Holle sign that she puts on her front porch. I put little signs under each window when they're open, and the doors. We have the 8 cats, so of course we can't keep the doors open, and we can only keep so many of the screens open just because we don't want, we don't want the cats getting out the window either. But so I put the sign on any opening, and I try to keep at least the windows cracked or whatever, just to stay within the letter of the law. So the giant signs at Michelle's house and smaller signs I just print up on my computer. I'll post them. We probably have them in the file section already, but I'll post them again as we get closer. People just use it, cut it out, and just tape it to the window. The window washing, I haven't been so good about that every year because windows are kind of hard to reach except for down here. But I do think that I need to focus myself on that a little more this year and actually try to turn it into a sacred duty where I'm cleaning with a ritual cleaning with the purpose of honoring Holle in my mind while I'm doing it. Let's see. Then I'm cleaning the bathroom. Our bathroom's pretty clean since we had it redone, but just a general cleaning of the bathroom is always a good thing anyway. Dusting the furniture, okay, and that includes dusting your altars, which may mean also picking everything up you got on it, dusting the stuff. Yeah, I know, which is for some of us that's a major project. That's only one altar. Yeah, you should dust your stuff off. It's almost like the third start of the year. The first start of the year being January 1st, second start of the year being Oschdret, and then the third start of the year being here, where now you're just refreshing your altars as Holle comes back. Then your porch is swept. Now, this is an interesting one because this one actually is tied to the date. It's supposed to be done by the sunset on April 30th. I should actually update this and say it's supposed to not start any later than sunset on April 29th. The This is because it's like the welcoming point, the entry point for Hull. If you got a porch, sweep them, all the porches. And Michelle also out of here, don't neglect the cabinet interior. Even though it's not specifically stated, yeah, clean everything if you can. Let's see. You do not need to do everything in the house, but do try to do a bit more than you think you can. So also, align the disposal of these items. Lenzbutzerei begins at Edstein and runs through Oschdret into Vonnetzeit. And so this is a long period to be able to clean stuff. And take advantage of it because a lot of times people think that spring cleaning just has to be done really fast and really, but not all of us are able to do that when we have jobs, when we have health issues or whatever. It's better to be able to span it out over a course of several weeks and just focus on one area at a time and actually give it your full focus. When we actually began to clean up the interior of the house here, I always looked at it as like a giant project. Oh my God, we got to clean this whole house. But when we started just chunking it and taking it in little bits, that kind of helped. Like today we're going to do this room. A week later we'll do this room. Of course, what ends up happening is you end up moving items from the second room back into the first room. But as long as you're putting them away and addressing them at that same, at the same day, it shouldn't get too out of control. Spring cleaning is a task. It can be very difficult. It can be very annoying, especially when it's hard to reach places. I really hate cleaning windows. I think they're actually, Michelle finds it cathartic. I actually can't stand. I don't mind the bathroom. I don't mind the kitchen. I don't mind the family room. I don't mind sweeping, all that stuff. For me, it's the windows and anything that involves spraying above my head where I can't reach the thing and the stuff running. But but it can be cathartic. It can be nice to start out fresh with a new home. And quite honestly, with at least in this area, usually by the end of April, the weather's warm enough that the breeze blowing through the house, the cross breezes, are actually kind of enjoyable. The lilacs are in bloom right now, and they'll probably be gone by then. But you pick up that scent and it rolls through the house. It's very, just relaxing and beautiful and everything. So then the other disposal holiday would be Allerliebeziel. But there you're tending to focus on, the sacred disposal of bad habits or, items that you need to remove from your life, especially if it's something that's part of a New Year's resolution. Let's see. So that's the long and the short of it. And again, we have that article posted on Urglaawe.net. Are there any questions about this? I didn't even check the Urglaawe group. Yeah, and of course, to answer to Richard's point a little more, this year everything is kind of topsy-turvy because of the whole, the whole COVID thing. Oh, it's in the group too. Well, yeah, but I'm at static. Oh, okay. Never mind, Michelle. I'm just reading your message now. I thought you referred to something else. And boom. Let's see. Oh, okay. I see myself. Where are the other questions? The question thread. Are there any questions about this? Let's see. Okay, I don't see any questions about the Lenzbutzerei. Does anybody have anything they want to ask in the chat room before we move on to the other topic? Wait, open the windows and put on Sade? Smooth operator or what? Howdy, Jared. Welcome. All right. So let me get my... All right. Okay, then. So The next topic would be probably the most difficult topic in all of Urglaawe to address directly head on because it is kind of busted um, and comes from very few respondents. So what I did was I decided to cheat with my PowerPoint this year and create a PowerPoint that I can actually read, even though you're not supposed to read PowerPoints, you know. But yeah, I'm going to do this. So again, if you didn't get the PowerPoint presentation, it's a PDF document. It's in the Urglaawe group in the file section, and it's also on urglaawe.net. And I think I still have that link handy. All right, so this is again the and all right, so I'm going to start this off with a caveat that we're not going to get this done in one sitting. We may not even get it done in two sittings because there is actually a lot of information on this. When I started really typing it out and copying and pasting from different places, like, we have a lot more on this than I thought we did. The problem is that it's not. You're not going to get the canned meanings the way like Elder Futhark will. The Thalarun is like the property. It's more how it's used in the healing practices. Still by a small number. We don't have a huge number of people doing it, but I got to tell you, it actually works. The system does work, but it's just very confusing because of because of the few number of respondents. And so what we're going to do is we're going to open up that PDF if you can get it on your computer. If you can't, it's going to be hard to follow, I admit. But so again, does everybody have it? Can everybody find it? Can everybody access it? I don't think I can share my screen on here to talk about it. It'd be nice if I could. All right. What's this? So anyway, so this is actually an Urglaawe 400 level class. I think our first one. So the subject is the Raane, or the runes, and we're going to be having little pronunciation lessons as we're going along. So slide number 2 here describes what this class is about and how it works and some of the background of Urglaawe in general. But slide number 3 here talks about the words. So how to say it. The Dutch word for rune is grammatically feminine, so it follows the declension of the article D. I try to encourage folks that when they begin to undertake any like the learning of Pennsylvania Dutch, to try to learn the article along with the noun so that you know which grammatical gender it is. And grammatical gender and physical gender are not always the same thing. Very important. Let's see. So next up would be, keep moving on. Got too many windows open. So the word for rune is spelled R-O-O-N, but it's pronounced Ron. Okay, Ron. Now the important thing with that is that O-O in English, we say oo, in Dutch you say O. And because you look at it, you look at R-O-O-N, you think, oh, it's rune. No, it is Ron. Then the plural form of it becomes a little more difficult because it goes from Ron to Raane. So double A is pronounced like an O, like Urglaawe. Right? Yes, Kimberly, it's the Raane is plural. So it's the rune equals the rune, and said like Rhone, and the Raane Okay. So the Ron and the Rona. Right. It sounds similar. The Ron, the Rona. Okay. Well, welcome, Andy. All right. So my light's all flickering in the back here. All right. The Ron and the Rona. It may not be easy to hear over the computer, but it's this, the O is very distinct. The double O is O, Ron, and then plural Raane. Just a little bit deeper with the AW. The Ron, the Raane. Right. And unfortunately, like for the double A sound really doesn't exist in English. It's kind of like it's close to the English word like law, the AW, but it doesn't exist in English exactly. And so it's very difficult sometimes for English speakers to adjust to that. And of course, it ends up in words like Urglaawe. So yeah, it's how you can say, oh, that Urglaawe thing, or and once again, how does the city paper describe what Urglaawe is? Philadelphia city paper, the sound that a peasant's throat makes when you stab it with a spear. All right. Next. So, I'm on slide number 5, or page 5 of the presentation. The Deitch rooms present us with some significant challenges for several reasons. Number one, there are very few respondents, which we'll go into more detail in the next slide. None knew the names of all the symbols. There was confusion over the same name being applied to two symbols, and that the system is probably not of antiquity. And that's an important one. I actually, my feeling and my sense is that somebody about 150 or 100 years ago or so got hold of some of this information, and somehow it got morphed as they were going along. It was broken. However, it really does work. And so we need to actually finish this in our copious spare time. But it just because something isn't necessarily ancient doesn't mean that it's not good. All right, now here's my first cheating one. Is going to be slide number 6. I'm actually reading something that I wrote for something else. And I hate to do this to you, but I didn't have time to craft a whole new PowerPoint in the top of my head. So now I'm going to caveat this because yes, I am citing Edward Thorson's work here, because as far as I know, he's the only one who's actually really done work in this section of runic studies in continental German work, and he's the only one who actually turned up something that turned up also in our lore, and that is the rune that we have that is the equivalent of Fehu or Fi. That symbol, I saw it in his book. I'm like, wait a minute, that's the same symbol that we have, and so there was a connection there that I could not ignore. In rune lore, he discusses the relationship between the runes and hex signs, which most of us Deitch folk know that there are several of the hex signs are based in runic symbols, but they have morphed over the centuries and have taken on their own personalities. The last paragraph on page 58 in that book is important because I have a Google Books link to that I'll post in there somewhere, post later. Is important. It matches the conclusions I drew from many of the interviews where a rune turned up. The symbols were specific, but many, and probably most of the practitioners, did not know that they were actually utilizing a rune. Some were aware the symbols were runes and had names for the symbols they were using, but most of them were just using the symbols and not actually knowing that they were using part of an ancient alphabet, or an alphabet that has been modified or evolving over the years. They just knew that you drew this when you did that. Which is kind of folklore on the one hand, but I also wonder how much information was lost, particularly during the time when being German, even if you weren't actually, even if you were Deitch, was very uncomfortable, and they were trying to, kind of break up the guilds and things like that subtly. It wasn't an outright suppression. It was mostly by making people look stupid. And it's how much information was lost during that time. So let's see. Often the runes were traced with the fingers over the target, very often starting with this to open. For me, I have no dominant hand, but I chose this as my application hand and this is my pulling hand, and so you would draw the things over the client's head, and which resulted in some rounding of the letters rather than the sharp angles we customarily see in runes in modern heathenry. Once the interviews expanded to include people who identified with Hexerai rather than Braucherei, actually this is an oversimplification, because the Hexerai-Braucherei thing is much more complicated than just saying, oh, I'm a Hex or I'm a Braucher. More information came out, particularly in areas of the Deutscherei where there is a distinction linguistically and conceptually between Braucherei and Hexerai. Hexerai practitioners tend to be very secretive and distrustful of academia. This attitude makes sense when one considers the condemnation of Hexerai as evil and black magic by religious authorities, and that stigma spilled over into general society. Yeah. So, and once we got the Hexerai folks on board, once the first person I had the first interview with somebody who I like flat out identified as Hexerai, he opened the floodgates by inviting by vouching for me to other people, and then that's when things really got started. All right, so this is now slide or page number 7. Urglaawe rejected Christian dualism and recognized that the stigma applied to Hexerai is the result of Christian mindset. It took a few years for the elderly practitioners of Hexerai to hear of Urglaawe, and even then, the first meetings were a little tense for me and for the person being interviewed. However, things warmed up, and the practitioners began to vouch for me in order to network and to gain more potential interviews. Thus, we became fortunate to have gained enough trust to receive information from these folks. Although the runes definitely appeared in Braucherei in many circumstances, the Hexerai folks provided more details by far. Among the interesting features of the runic understanding was the association of runes with elements and with proactive and reactive and neutral energies. The element associations were not consistent or complete, but they knew where each of the 12, they knew there were 12 elements, and that these 12 were associated with symbols or with runes, and it was badly broken, and so we ended up having to, I did have to go to extant sources because there was an extant source that actually had almost the exact same information that they did. Not exactly, but it ended up working out quite well. So moving on to slide number 7. Again, I'm still cheating and reading. Unfortunately, none of the folks I interviewed knew the 24 runes by name, but a few did have 24 symbols, most of which were recognizably Elder Futhark runes, and a few reminded me of zodiac symbols. And they did not all have the same 12 elements. A good number of the folks knew there were 12 elements, but only knew the names of a few. One Hex told me that she was taught the list of elements by her mentor, but when she was much younger, but as she aged, her memory began to fail her. And that right there, that is a common theme, unfortunately, where we have some of these practitioners who are so elderly in their 90s, I think a couple are over 100, and they would start to say something, and then they'd be like, well, I had this one thing that I did, and then they just couldn't remember it anymore, and a couple of them kind of got upset by that, but they shared what they could. And moving on again, interestingly, during the time that these interviews were taking place, I happened upon a book that bore consistency with and often matching precisely what I was hearing from the interviews, although I believe the author's work is the result of his own theories and practices. So I did use Ulf Asgerdsson's book, Ig's book, as a basis to try to analyze and understand what they were saying here in the Hexerai practice, and it matched up easily enough that I was actually able to figure out and get the 12 elements filled in. We don't do things exactly the way he does it, but he did kind of help with it. The element listing and the way he described it matches probably about a third of the Hexerai practitioners, but it's better than the other 2/3 were all over the place. So let's see. Then on page 10, among the most unique rune utilizations I encountered came from 3 elderly, 80 plus, which is not that far up the pike from me, self-identified Hexerai practitioners who did not seem to know one another nor live near each other. In all 3 cases, they had associated each digit on their fingers with a rune symbol. This one's hard. This one's really esoteric, but in all 3 cases, they had associated each digit on their fingers with a rune symbol. The fingers on the left hand were reactive, and the fingers on the right hand were proactive. The thumbs were used for opening, sealing, and clearing, and the runes associated with a particular digit were not the same among them, but their descriptions of how they utilized the runes was fairly similar. I tried doing this, but unfortunately, could not remember which um, which digit I put the this reactive rune on. But I haven't mastered that one yet. But so you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you just associate this particular digit with that, and that's where you apply that energy. Can't say I mastered that one, but it is an interesting concept. And these three were, two of them were like 40 miles apart, I think, and the other one was like 80 miles to the west. But again, I don't know if they had any common root other than that. I've utilized their method, again, which involves casting the runes from the digits while sweeping the hand over the client's body or using the digits to detect elemental imbalances in their bodies. I do not use it very often because it expends a lot of my mental energy just to concentrate on the digits. I find it easier to use standard brow sweeps and to seek energy blockages, and then to use the runes to aid in the identification of elemental problems. Let's see. And that whole I kind of like the idea of it, like as a specialty or like for some sort of extra function. But yeah, I don't. At this point in my life, I don't know if I could actually. I don't know if I could actually memorize all that stuff at this point. I would like to, but. One second. Okay, so let's see. So let's see. Moving on now to, and I wonder, like, I don't know if it was really. I remark in the PowerPoint presentation that it may have been a fairly common practice in the past. I actually really don't think that's the case. I think it's actually an uncommon one. I don't know if somebody devised it and then shared it among a small group of Hexrite practitioners. But I do think it's cool, and if somebody wants to undertake that effort when they're studying this sort of thing, good luck. Now the upshots, slide number 11. The runes have survived in different contexts in Dutch culture since settlement, so it's not like we're importing something that doesn't already exist. For instance, we've seen the Engel rune, or better known as Ingvas to the Elder Futhar. The Engel rune carved into the granary walls. We've seen hoggle etched into loom structures. Also, as hoggle as the basis for the rosette hex sign, and some other signs that are hanging on barns to keep block bad energies from coming in. The swirling swastika, which is the one that actually withstood the war, and and they actually reverse the directions on it so that it doesn't actually have any Nazi kind of sentiment to it. It never did. But it does make it's based on the Suna or the Sovilo rune, presented as raindrops to evoke balance between sunshine and rain. So this stuff is present in the culture. Moving on to slide number 12. As broken as the system is, some practitioners use the symbols frequently. Now, even if people don't understand the, I hate to use the word because it's become the word in English, but shamanic aspects of the Khan Sega or the Butzaman Sega at Stanning in February, people do draw runes on. It is the Anvat rune that gets drawn on the Butzaman's forehead, while the Braucher steps out and travels to the western leaves to try to draw the ancestral plant spirits back to wake up the dormant ones. Particular runes for particular energies or ailments, and we got a whole list of those, and that right there is probably the piece de resistance of our rune system, because even though it may not be widely known, the use of particular runic energies applied towards particular afflictions, and having categorized them by the proactive, reactive energies within them, might help some of us understand why when we actually started doing the rune, reading the rune readings over the computer, why some of them appeared so like popping and vibrant, while some of the others were much more muted but just as strong, and why we started seeing colors in them and 3D aspects of them. It's because I think of some of these particular energies. And let me just check something here. Anything else I'm missing here? Then okay, proactive and reactive in the 12 elements, and the healing symbols. Some of the Christians do this too with their cross, but we discovered that some people aren't really drawing a cross. They were just drawing this thing that looks like the note or Northese rune, particularly over bruises. So moving right along. Now this is where this right here is borrowed from Askerson, because he expressed it so well. And this is the 12 elements of the physical plane. So you have spirit, or Vort. In this case, this is where he calls it spirit, but the overarching one that the Hexerei practitioners identified was Vort, which actually ties into, see, this is where it all ties together, is the concept of whether Vort is conscious or unconscious. Is Vort a maker god, and the questions like that come through Hexerei practice, but here it turns up as an element. And we still don't have an answer to whether Vort is conscious or unconscious, but that's a good debate topic for the future. Fire is absolute expansion, so it's 9 parts fire and 0 parts ice. And ice is absolute stasis, 0 parts fire and 9 parts ice. So each of these elements consists of a combination of primal fire and primal ice. Time is 8 parts fire and 1 part ice. Air is 7 parts fire and 2 parts ice. Water is 6 parts fire and 3 parts ice. Light is 5 parts fire and 4 parts ice. Yeast is 4 parts fire and 5 parts ice. Metal is 3 parts fire and 6 parts ice. Venom is 2 parts fire and 7 parts ice. And salt is 1 part fire and 8 parts ice. And then earth is the intersection of all. This is this could be kind of, when I read this in Askerson, I thought, this is actually kind of brilliant. I haven't quite pieced it all together yet, because we really haven't had time to focus so much on the studies of the consistency of these elements. But I think it's going to be coming now that we're starting to push this stuff out. But these arrangements do influence which things are good with working for and against others. Now, unfortunately, I did not have time to really draw this up nicely. Michelle actually has made some pretty good what we call Vanna White cards from when we do our runic intonations, and she holds the letters up. But this is a list of the runes as they're being used in Hexerei. Okay, number 1, you'll see that there's 2 entries above the word Fi. Fi, that's V-I-E-H, Fi. And it's actually the second one that is more common, and that's also the one. It looks kind of like a Fehu rune with one of the arms chopped off. That one is the more common. It's also the one that Thorson referred to in rune lore. The second one was unnamed, and that's what we call we've been calling it Ur, and I think the discussions are going to keep coming up on that. And you can look at the rest of the list, because we're going to be going through them all individually anyway at some point. But some of them are really annoying, particularly if you look at the bottom row where there's a circle. This is where the practitioner, it was one guy in particular, who was referring to both these symbols by the name Guile. And Guile is definitely a conflation of the Avaz and Ivaz runes, because it makes the sound of Ivaz, but it has a meaning closer to Avaz. Guile means horses. And by the way, to any German speakers in here, yes, it means horses. It does not mean horny. But luscious or whatever. But it's been a real Unamid. It's been a big that's been a big problem, and I think that we actually later interviews have revealed some of these. We didn't have a name for the Laguz equivalent until I think 2018 or 2019. Somebody actually mentioned it in one of the interviews. We got Loch, and then the Iva I think was a communal decision to address the problem with Ivas. So problems right for the get go. Here we go. Right. This is now the first one. This is slide number 15. Problem. Everybody acknowledges that there is a P equivalent, but no one knows the name. So we essentially really have a truly a blank rune because we have all sorts of things. We have some associations with it. We have what it can do, but we don't have a name for it. And the funny thing about Deutsch is that there are words that begin with P, but many of the words that begin in P with a P in German are rendered as a B in Deutsch, and many of the words that have P's in the middle of them are rendered as BBs in Deutsch, which is pronounced like a P. So yeah, we have to figure that one out because as I was going through this today, I started realizing we have more in this than I thought we did, and we probably should get that problem resolved. It may take communal reconstruction, but once it's in there, then it can start to build up energies on its own. The major confusion was the use of the word guile, meaning horses, for the symbols of equivalent of Avaz, like we do to meaning, and Ivaz due to vowel sound. Ivaz was resolved as Iva, but Avaz still has a name that does not contain the sound associated with the rune, and that to me is a problem. Like if I'm intoning Avaz, but I'm saying guile, then I'm not intoning the sound that's even associated with it. The problem is that I just did a cursory check, but there is no living cognate of Avaz in German or in Deutsch, and so we really can't just go jump on some cognate and try to have it bail us out. That's going to be a piece of work that we got to work on. The equivalent name for Laguz turned up in a later interview, Loch. Runes have always existed. This one I actually found in my notes, and I didn't realize that. I don't know. I'm not sure. I think I wrote it somewhere else once, but I'm not sure. This is key for Urglaawe philosophy because it might actually differ from what you're used to. Runes have always existed, and they do have an association with Vudan as a whole, but there is something about the Oschdret, or the eastern leaves of the world tree, and Weißkeppiki also playing a critical role in their emanation. This is potentially a major piece of broken lore, considering that Meya, or life force energy, and magic also originally arise from the Oschdret. So that one really have to figure out. We may be spending a lot of time in the eastern leaves. No, Vudan definitely is credited with bringing them and like earning them and winning them. Maybe he was hanging off the branches on the eastern leaves. I don't know, but there's something about there in our tradition that's broken. It's missing, but there's something about the runes and that life force energy that we need to follow up on. All right. We're actually going faster than I thought we would. All right. Slide number 16. All right. This is where we get the elements and their runic associations. If you can't read it very well in your off the computer, you go out to braucherei.org and then there's a runic associations link, and you can actually read it. I'll just post it. It'll be a little bit easier. I don't post much to braucherei.org because mostly due to time, and also because a lot of stuff that we write is under verboten, and I really can't put it up there anyway. But as that has a runic associations list there. It's the same one that's in the PowerPoint, but it might be easier to read on screen. So we have spirit, we have the positive or the proactive and negative react. All right, so first off, one of the things I need to do is eliminate the words positive and negative. It should be proactive and reactive because, generally speaking, when somebody hears the word positive, they think of something great. Well, right now you don't want to be testing positive for COVID, so it's not always good. And negative as being something detrimental. It's more proactive and reactive. The thing is either like a more animated force or it's a more passive force, and it is important because if you're following this structure when you're doing any healing in Brockwari, and by the way, you can do Brockwari without doing any of this stuff at all. This is just more specialized, and more people who like to use the runes can find it to be more comfortable. Plus, I like the more esoteric aspects of this myself. But lots of people who practice Brockwari have absolutely no idea of this because this is not a big thing among the Christians. This is mostly coming from Hexerai practice. So the proactive and the reactive, and you'll see how they line up. I'm not going to read the whole list here because we can discuss it as we're going through each rune. But right there in time, though, this one I do want to talk about. Time, we see Yor as being the proactive one, and then we have our blank unknown rune here, the Parathro equivalent that we just need to fill in because the time aspects they actually matter in some of the healing work that we do. So this rune, if we're going to be using it for any sort of thing, we need to name it, and it needs to be named appropriately along the lines of the letter P. And off the top of my head, I can't think of an appropriate name, but we really haven't put that much concentrated effort yet into deciding what we as a community would find to be most useful there. All right, so now number 17. Each has a proactive, reactive, and neutral quality. The neutral qualities we tend to pass over because when practicing Brockwari or Hexerai, we don't sense something out of kilter. You're looking for imbalances, and so when you're going over it, the neutral energies aren't the ones that are catching your attention generally. They can catch your attention if you're dealing in a hot spot and all of a sudden there's a neutral area. But these are not literal elements per se. They're developing a sensitivity. Developing sensitivity to them can help identify issues within a client. This is where the runes can actually be very helpful. So, like when we're talking about venom, we're not talking about literally applying venom to somebody's physical body or spiritual body or anything. But venom is one of the natural elements that they consider, and it does cover a whole bunch of things that are potentially toxic. And sometimes when you're fighting things or combating things, you need the things that give the sting. And a lot of Brockwari and Hexerai charms call the snake stings or whatever, or use the sing, the whole sing sound, which means they take your poison. Poison energetically is very useful when you're practicing Hexerai or Brockwari. So this list is going to be interesting. Here's a list of what some of these things, the categories tend to fall into. So proactive spirit tends to be associated with mania and autism. So it can be helpful in those. This means this is excess. Excess proactive spirit emanating from the body may be a symptom of mania, autism, reactive depression and grief. Fire, proactive would be growth and boils, reactive would be abrasions. Time, proactive is dementia and some scars. Reactive is Alzheimer's, also some scars. Now, a lot of the differentiation between the proactive scars and the reactive scars often has to do with how the scar came to be in the first place. A lot of times, if it's something that, like the body, like say you had a growth there and it was removed in that scar, that might be actually coming from proactive time, while reactive time might be something that hit you and left a scar behind. It's you have to tune yourself to how it happens sometimes, but when you actually read it, kind of sense the more muted feel to it as being the reactive one, while in some cases the proactive is like just jumping right out at you. All right. Next is air. Proactive would be cough and sleep apnea. Reactive might be asthma. Water, proactive, polyuria, edema of some types, and reactive might be kidney stones. Light, proactive is exhaustion, rheumatism, and reactive might be stress. Moving on to slide 19. Yeast, proactive might be some autoimmune issues, and reactive bacterial and fungal infections. Now, this one's a little rough because we'll see autoimmune issues turning up in other places, and determining which autoimmune things fall into which categories. A lot of times you have to just read up on the energy, but a lot of them are things that are causing the body to react against itself in terms of what's a good example? Lupus. Okay, let's go with lupus. Michelle might be able to provide more information about that, but that actually is said to stem from yeast, from overactive yeast in the energy fields, or to be at least associated with it. And so I'll let her talk about how she might view that. If she doesn't have an opinion, I can add more to it, but I think she knows more about that than I. If you don't mind, Michelle. Then metal, proactive, some chemical abuse, bleeding, reactive, bruising and some deficiencies. Venom, proactive, autoimmune issues. That's I don't know enough of the list off the top of my head, but I can tell you that pure red cell aplasia would fall into that category. Salt, proactive, would be edema, hyperthyroidism, and reactive, heat stroke or hypothyroidism. Earth, proactive, constipation, reactive diarrhea. I think that one actually probably speaks pretty clearly for the difference between proactive and reactive. And ice, proactive, some autoimmune issues, the ones that cause real slowdowns in the system. Sedentary tendencies, reactive bone breaks, and reduced mobility. Okay. Next. All right, this is our first rune. I don't think we still have about 15 minutes, so we'll go with as much as we can go. All right, this is the rune Vieh, V-I-E-H. All right. Literally, it means cattle, just like Fehu. Represents most of the other things that are connected with Fehu, but also has a connection to fire. Fire is the element associated within Hexerai and is seen as a proactive force. Afflictions of elemental ice may be combated with Vieh. So the application of energetic fire to the bone break runes, believe it or not, can actually help they're saying it can help speed up the healing from it. It's still going to take time, obviously, because you broke a bone. But so you'll actually see these practitioners drawing the rune on there and applying the energy. The way that not everybody practices this way, but the way that most of the brokers and Hexerai practitioners I came across, you're making a circuit. Hold on. You're making a circuit with your client. Your application hand is pushing, and your shoeing hand is pulling. This hand is throwing stuff off that's unnecessary. You got to cleanse that out later. But then things that stay in with you are getting processed in your mind's eye, and oftentimes they're going through some runic associations up there that kind of neutralize the energy. Which, by the way, the big rune for that is Dog or Dagaz, that I use in my practice with that. So let's see. Some afflictions are old injuries that cause reduced mobility, like reactive ice, atrophy from sedentary lifestyle, proactive ice, and even afflictions caused by reactive fire. So you can actually use proactive fire to fight issues with reactive fire. Ur. Now that we just called it Ur because we don't really have a name for it, but we really do not know this to be passed from antiquity, as we said before, as opposed to being added later. But this is what has gotten passed along. We have no name for this rune in Deutsch, and most aspects of it are completely reconstructed, mostly from the process of elimination or by using Asgridsson's book as for some hints or some ideas. Moving on to page 22. It is odd that no name has been passed down for this rune, though, particularly since u and I are very common sounds in Dutch. Perhaps the absence of a name is due to the fact that the aurochs, which is what the name Uruz means, is totally outside the frame of reference for our forebears in this continent. Or perhaps the name was simply lost. I think it was actually just lost. Or, I don't know. That's a big question, especially if, Urglaawe, it would be nice if we had a name for it. But ironically, a symbol is known for it, at least by Hexerei practitioner two, and appears much like a capital U. In current practice, it has been placed as part of reconstruction in association with proactive elemental salt, which makes it useful in energetic healing for combating afflictions of time. Okay, such as proactive dementia or reactive Alzheimer's, or to deal with reactive salt afflictions such as heat stroke or hypothyroidism. So salt is the opposite of time in this case. Yeah, Michelle, thank you for your explanation there. Excess proactive salt energies are associated with certain types of edema and with hypothyroidism, and in those cases, the use of the rune is not suggested. U is also a power rune, providing energy, courage, and raw physical, psychic, and spiritual strength to other runes and to workings. That much we do know from our own lore. So there's one like a little shred of knowledge came down, but it fits in nicely with what we got. All right, next one is Duna or Dorn. We tend to use Duna more, although the actual probably older meaning is actually Dorn because it is related to thorn. But the use of the D sound or a soft aspirated T. There is no th sound in Dutch. There probably used to be some element of it because you see TH names in German, and they might have actually, and they kind of do like a t, but in Dutch you pretty much don't really have that. This rune is associated with reactive elemental venom. It is a deterrent, vengeful, and reactive force. And the spiritual venom has its uses. It can kill off invading forces of the mind, on the mind, body, and spirit. Despite its reactive nature, it can be used preemptively. Most importantly, associated with thyrses. A thyrse is a kind of giant, and Donor is half giant according to Norse lore, and Erda, his mother, in our lore, could be a giantess even in our lore. So there is no specific reference either way, although Erda is pretty much a goddess. The word thirst has a possible connection to one word in Dutch, Dooslaufer, or a twilight walker or dusk walker, which makes it a dangerous creature. I like that. I like that, Dooslaufer. And that connection comes primarily through Grimm's analysis on pages 520 and 521 of Teutonic mythology. In Dutch lore, there are several types of giants, some of which are toxic to us and to the entire order of the physical plane. They bring chaos or destruction by their very presence. Oh, look, I had the same entry here twice here. Right? This is slide number 24. Rune author Oschdret, who I mentioned earlier, makes this connection also between the thirst and venom, though he says the thyrses are made of venom. According to him, venom is 2 parts fire to 7 parts ice, which would have air as its opponent. This is consistent with the Dutch elemental remnants, and the Donor rune, as reactive venom, does combat proactive air afflictions, which include proactive sleep apnea, emotional attacks, and panic attacks, as well as reactive invasion visions, airborne communicate. Oh boy, look at this. Airborne communicable diseases. Well, gee, where have we heard of airborne communicable diseases lately? So I think that we all should be taking a little bit of this Duna into our hearts right now. Yeah, this is a very useful rune right now during this COVID crisis. And also for those of us like certain person here who recently just started having nightmares, it's could come in handy. Yeah, so get to know your Donor rune. So the rune of proactive venom is Iva. So there we go, reactive venom. Let's see, let's do Anvat, and then I think we'll put we'll do Anvat for tonight, and then we'll stop with that, and then we'll just talk about stuff in more detail for a bit. All right, so Anvat on slide number, come on, 25. Anvat literally means answer, and it's one of the runes encountered most in the Braucherei interviews, particularly in some groups' Kansega rituals of activating a Butzaman. Now, when I went through my training, we learned of the Kansega, we learned of what it was, but we didn't actually. Nobody left in our guild actually knew precisely exactly how to do it. It was mostly being done by conjecture. It's pretty close, but in the guild to which my great grandmother actually had belonged, they actually still had the pretty much the entire story, and they used this rune. And so the first time I actually saw somebody doing this, she was doing the Butzaman activation, and she was drawing the symbol over the head, and I couldn't quite follow her thumb to figure out what she was doing, but she was whispering the same kinds of things that other brokers do, and so I asked her if she could just draw out what she was drawing. So she took a pen, or actually a marker, I think, and a piece of paper, and she drew the symbol out, and I was like, huh, look at that. And she said it's the, and she looked at, she said, well, we're seeking the answer, we're seeking the Anvat. And of course it looked very much like the Ansu's rune, and then all of a sudden, woo, ding 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 ding, it made sense. It was a very, very blessed discovery. So in that context, the rune is a medium for calling to the dormant plant spirits inside the Butzaman structure. This is like the whole zombie voodoo doll thing, that makes the Butzaman saga so exciting, because sometimes you don't know exactly which kinds of plant spirits you're waking up and what mood they'll be in, but usually they're very happy to be helped. There are two things going on in a Kansega ritual. In one, the Braucher forms a bridge from the Veshblätter, from here to there. You become the bridge. And when you're the bridge, you're inviting or talking to the plant spirits in the western leaves to come in to awaken the dormant plant spirits, particularly those that are seen as descendants of them. This is really, this is the kind of stuff that when I say at school, I'm like, well, I think I'm batshit crazy. But meanwhile, the Braucher is seeking out the answer from those spirits to the call of the rune being drawn on the forehead. So you're forming this bridge where very shamanic, where you're talking to the plant spirits on this side and inviting them to come here and to lend their energies and to help to wake up their descendants. And then while that's going on, you're also talking to this side and you're seeking the answer from them. And once you get the answer that they're awake, that you can keep the bridge open if you have more to do. Usually you thank them for coming and send them back on their way. And now you have your activated little zombie voodoo doll that can stand out in your garden and terrorize all the spirits that try to invade. Yeah, I gotta tell you, I love Kansega. It's actually it's very exhausting sometimes, and you get there was one time I was doing it. I think I was getting sick. I had a migraine, I think, and like some spirit challenged me coming in. And it was actually a Butzaman that kind of interceded. It was kind of funny. I don't remember. I think it was Corinne's. I don't remember, but I think everybody remembers that. I think Michelle had to take over the rest of them after that one. But once the energy is heard, the Butzaman becomes a unique energy of merged plant spirits who is given our breath of life. The visiting plant spirits are returned, and the connection is closed to the Veshblätter. So Anvat is a rune of proactive air. The immediate sense to me was that it would be reactive rather than proactive, since it is a response. But it's worth noting that the reactive air rune is Geva or Gabo, which reflects the exchange of the energies and of the breath. So this reflects that a response is a matter of choice and will, among other circumstances. The choice to respond is proactive in the case of Anvat. Ailments of proactive air, too much Anvat, include coughs and sleep apnea. The counter to proactive air is frequently reactive venom, which brings us right back to Donor or Dorn. All right, let's see. It's 8:12. Okay, I think that this is a good time for us to stop. We'll pick up with the next runes on the next time we do one of these. Let me see something. Find our thread. This is a very heavy topic in a lot of ways, and I hope you're getting something. I hate to cheat and read, but there's just so much information that I don't have all this stuff right here on the top of my head. Let's see. What am I missing here? So here's our question thread. I answered Ross's already, right? And there's no other additions to it. 6 comments. And see that I feel from sex. All right, so to the questions then. All right. And you may as well type the questions right in this chat window here. Okay. Okay, Michelle, go ahead. Let's see where to go. All right. Well, all right, here we go. Okay. Well, okay. Because I was thinking about this when I was doing this today. We have to learn these basic things because this is how it is still living within our culture. But considering that Urglaawe is not Braucherei or Hexerei, although they are kind of wrapped around each other, please explain how common Urglaawe can use the runes in their practice. Buried within these, all this stuff that we're putting up here are aspects related to what the runes actually mean. I think that Teresa had said that that she sees subtle differences between the Elder Futhark's interpretations and ours. And I agree with that. The thing is that we as a community have to still understand them ourselves. So for instance, that whole thing with fee and cattle, and the whole concept of portable currencies or things that are energies or property that's easily explained, or easily exchanged, but also with that fiery aspect to it. We need to kind of boil down what that actually means within Urglaawe practice. When we call to those energies, say we're doing say I'm reading the fee off of somebody's head. Usually, I'm looking at that and seeing there's either a wealth issue or there is a wealth coming, and you kind of have to interpret it based on how the rune's presenting itself and what context it comes in. We see Ur a lot, and oftentimes it means that's an indicator that somebody either needs that boost of power, or they're on a charge already. So let's see. So far we got to where? So and Dorn, that whole concept of the reactive force of defense, or actually everything that we described in there about, what was the exact wording? Because it's reactive, but it can be, what's the word that I used? It's slipping my head now. It can be preemptive. Like you can take a preemptive strike and still have it be reactive because you're reacting to the buildup of the opposition. So when we get through this whole alphabet, I think I might add some more to the lines of the runes that we've already visited upon here, but it's we have to kind of map that out a little bit better. Unfortunately, as you'll see, if you scroll down through that presentation, you'll see that we haven't even gotten to describing all these runes yet. We have a lot of information that just has to get belched up there, but a lot of it really is just very time-consuming to kind of assemble. But we have enough runes probably for the next one. We can work on some of the other ones in the meantime. But yeah, you can begin to incorporate them. However you use the Elder Futhark now, you can actually begin to apply our runes for Urglaawe practice. We are going to be, if you use the well of the well, the well of weird or wart as as a repository for information, we're going to be adding our runic energies into that, and they're going to begin to grow. But it's going to be something that we have to, as a community, have to finish. And I know my runes. I do runes a lot. I use them a lot. But it's the writing of it and describing of it is not, and thinking about it. It's very time consuming when you're trying to do 16 other things. So I actually may employ some of you to kind of take on a little bit of a charge with some of this, because we have the information, but getting it organized is still not a complete process. This is actually a wonderful thing that we're doing this, because it's actually kind of forcing our hands to actually get it done. 1 second, please. Stacy, if you want to share what you just messaged me to the group, that would actually be interesting. Yeah, I guess I kind of assumed that everybody knew this, but I'm going to repeat what Michelle's saying here. Understanding Bracharai and Hexarai. Bracharai and Hexarai are traditional folk magic and healing traditions that are passed from member to apprentice, although family members can also pass it to one another without necessarily being in a formal guild. They were actually the traditional doctors in the villages when our ancestors got here and they began to settle out in the frontier. The old ways came with them and actually rooted here better, because they were now separated from the church authorities in some cases, and so a lot of old traditions actually kind of expanded and became wider practiced here than they were over in Europe. And then so there was this dissonance between what Braucherei and Hexerei are, and I'm going to explain this as well as I can. You'll often hear them likened to, well, Braucherei is white magic and Hexerei is black magic. But that's using a very dualistic form of expression. It gets some points across, but it also depends on where you're from. Where I grew up and where Michelle grew up, there was considered to be a distinction between Braucherei and Hexerei. Braucherei was of God, and Hexerei was of the devil. Okay? But funny thing about that is, in other parts of the state, the word Hexerei covers what we consider Braucherei and Hexerei. In other parts of the state, Braucherei covers what we consider Hexerei and Braucherei. So it's not so clear cut. And after having done these interviews with, I don't even know how many people identify as Hexerei, but almost probably good of the total number of practitioners, probably more than half at this point are people who identify as Hexerei practitioners, and I only found one of them who even believed in Satan, and as an entity. Some of them, like nominal Christians, they will go to church, but they really didn't believe in this, in the whole Satan thing. So the association of Hexerei with Satanism is a Christian overlay, number one, and then also a lot of them recognize the helpful entities as deities or whatever. So just looked at them as pagan saints, and it's they carried some of the more of the older traditions. Braucherei does too. They just refer. They refer. All right. Quick story. Picture it. Naples, Florida, 2007. Somebody who has identified as Christian his entire life, but always had one foot in the old Dutch world and the other one in the more standard Christian world, is hearing the calls of these multiple goddesses in his head and is wondering what he should do about it. So he goes to a bookstore in Naples, Florida, when he was vacationing with his partner, and finds Hinduism for Dummies or something like that, some similar title, and because it's the only religion I knew of that had all these gods. So the book was authored by somebody of Norwegian descent, and in the as I'm reading this book, she refers to Oschdret. So I was like, what's that? So I go and look that up, and I was like, well, this is a little interesting. It's a little closer to home, whatever. And then so I bought Diana Paxton's Essential Oschdret, and when I got it, I'm reading. I'm like, oh my god! I'm like, I'm like, wait a minute. This is describing our helpful entities. We have this in our own culture. We just didn't call them deities. We didn't call them gods. But it was right there, right in front of your face. And then I started thinking, like flashbacks to being 4 years old. And, my great aunt, oh, Evergrey Jaeger's coming. Got to go inside. And then all of a sudden, it's just like all the rolling punches, just, oh my God, this stuff's all alive in our own culture. And that's basically how Urglaawe got started. I mean, initially I was planning on bringing our information out and maybe getting it to be more tapestry with other heathen traditions, but it's each heathen branch has its own, distinctions and peculiarities and uniqueness, and none of that stuff should be eradicated or homogenized, really. So Urglaawe became standalone, and then it's like the floodgates were open. So I don't remember even how I got started on that, but this stuff's alive in our own culture even now, and the fact that back in the 20s when this is something many may not know, but in the 19 teens and 20s, it wasn't necessarily so great to be of German descent. Even if you were of Dutch descent and your ancestors didn't live in the modern German state ever, because it didn't exist when we left, and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and to a degree, I think the federal government also had some concerns about the fact that you could leave Philadelphia and go most of the way to Pittsburgh before you really had to bother speaking English. And so this unassimilated fifth column living here as tensions were arriving with Germany worried them. And there were efforts to try to undermine the culture. The principal efforts focused on the Brauchers and the Hexes because they were the communities, like the nexus points in the community. And you see the same kind of behavior in the Soviet Union with how they tried to make the shamans in Siberia look backward and stupid. Well, that's what they did with our ancestors too. Is they tried to make them look backward and stupid, and they would put these kinds of blue laws into effect where divination became illegal, and the AMA did kind of provide them with information about why these Brauchers and Hexes shouldn't be doing any work on anybody. There was a brief time, I only have one or two references to this, where in the 1920s, Brauchers were actually being issued licenses by the state of Pennsylvania, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, but that got cut off as the attempt to suppress continued, suppress and undermine. And then, of course, World War II came, and that made things even worse. And it wasn't until the kitsch era of the 50s when it became, where they took us and kind of took our culture and kind of romanticized it in a way, which is the primary reason the culture actually survived. Is that we actually, a lot of people say, well, that's not real Pennsylvania. Well, yeah, it is. The kitschy stuff is what could allow our full consciousness to exist, to continue to exist when we were being undermined otherwise. And so we owe a lot to the kitschy stuff, and I think it's kind of cute. If you don't know what I mean by kitschy stuff, give me a second here. Things like hex signs being plastered on everything, like a milk jug, whatever that is. That's actually allowed the old symbols and everything to continue to exist in a safe environment, and so we're lucky for that, because then that expanded into the Renaissance of the culture, which has expanded into more zest and zeal for learning a language, and I'm pretty happy about all that stuff. The big concern I have is that we have to make sure that our symbols do not suffer the same fate as the symbols in Germany and elsewhere. We want to make sure that we keep it inclusive and welcoming to people. The We can't let we can have our pride in our heritage. We are a minority, um, but we cannot become so exclusive that we're afraid of people who aren't like us. No, that we are. Urglaawe is definitely inclusive, and we welcome people of any background. If they hear the call of our gods and goddesses, or if their ancestors direct them toward us, or whatever, please come and join us. Um, let's see what else. I haven't read any of the questions on that list yet, and they're scrolling faster than I can get to them. But the so so Brauerei and Hexerei to us means something different. What we did this required a real adjustment in my own head, because again I grew up in a place where they may have been opposite sides of the same coin, but they were still the same. They were still opposite sides. But what we had to do is we had to shed that dualism and look at the coin rather than the sides of the coin. And so eliminating that, we actually kind of use Brauerei and Hexerei. Um, was that Michelle? No. The Yeah, Brauerei. Technically, Brauerei. You need to be trained by mentors. Unfortunately, this is where the modern world is so annoying, because we are so busy with our work and our all of our things. Now, as Jenny pointed out to me last week, well, this is a good time to actually maybe try to move the guild along, because we're all stuck at home. Well, stuck at home, but I'm still working. But there is a point to that, because generally speaking, the way it worked was you had a village, and within the village you had your Braucherin or your Braucher or whatever, and they had the mentors, and they would kind of have like a lifelong relationship, at least, where they could learn the stuff and they could still refer back to one another later on as time went on. But the closest, let's see, I don't know which of the folks in our guild is actually the closest to me physically, but it would take any of them at least 45 minutes to get to me. Maybe a little bit less for Vic, I don't know, but that's not the way that the tradition thrived. It thrived by communities, and then this Braucher might move over to this community, and they might teach more people. We're trying to function a they're trying to function as a guild in a inorganic environment. The computer just isn't quite the same. When I got trained, I spent a lot of time with my mentor, but even that was difficult because I lived even further away. But at that point, I happened to be, a little younger, a little more spry, and I was able to learn a lot more. The interviews provided even more information, but that's a problem. It's a problem because we're trying to transmit everything. That's why I'm doing a lot of writing, because the writing can at least go out to more people and survive. Not everything that is in Braucherei is under forbot. The stuff that's not under forbot is what we consider sometimes like the first aid Braucherei. The things that the people in the fields would learn if you got a severe cut out there, what would you do? Some of it was the physical practice of which herbs you would use for this, that, or the other thing, and other things were the energetic practices. And it is a living tradition. The problem is that sometimes the forbots actually really get in the way, and that's how you end up with people writing stuff that shouldn't be written. But we observe the forbots as closely as we can. I go by the letter of the law generally, which allows us sometimes to replace a word or two, because sometimes it's only one word that's actually the one that's under forbot. But forbot, by the way, meaning that's taboo. You're not supposed to write it. You're not supposed to share with people who aren't having the power passed to them or whatever. So anyway, that's not for us. Braucherei and Hexerei are essentially the same thing, but I do mention where they came from because historically, where I grew up in my part of the state, if people knew you were a hex, you probably would have a different experience from a person who is known as a browker, and that is because of that stigma. All right. So anyway, I lost where we are in the questions. Hold on. All right, so you mentioned you've been trained in these practices. What did that training look like? Okay. Well, the Consega ritual I described already in the video. Um, that one was actually mentioned in my guild, talked about the activation and everything, and performed in my guild, but not. It was kind of reconstructed. But what I ended up doing is I had the fortune of still having a connection to my the guild that was my great grandmother was a part of, which is the Palmerton Harrity one up in Carbon County, and they actually had a more full ritual than we did, and that's where the Onbot rune first showed up to me. So the training, what did it look like? Well, I was done through the Three Sisters Center, of which I'm technically still a part. The center itself is defunct, which is unfortunate. But what they did is they had a huge course that was assembled with information of much of the lore that we're talking about with the side lore, the legends, like the folk tales, and bringing up some of these helpful entities and actually recognizing them as deities, things like that. So you would undergo that course, and if at the end of that course you were like they could sense that you'd be a good browser, you would have the opportunity to enter the guild, and that's what happened to me. I went through the guild, and it took me 3 years, I think, of fairly intense one-on-one instruction to actually get the power pass to me officially, and so it's. I think that if we would have lived closer to each other, it probably would have happened a lot more quickly. But again, the reality is that, and you can have the power pass without knowing everything, but it really is it's a lot to take on. The energetics are actually not the hard part. The harder parts are the sympathetics and the herbalism. And not everybody ever gets the herbalism. We try to give some instruction that we can, but what we do is we said we reference people to a course where one of the people in the guild actually does instruction. She doesn't specifically do it for Braucherei, but she is a Braucherin, so she does pass some of that information along as she's going. But it takes a long time, especially in this modern thing. You can actually be a decent Braucher with just baseline energetics and just understanding the transfer of energies, the manipulation of energies. The sympathetics, sympathetics are like a lot of times they're like the kitchen man, like where you take your food and do something with it to symbolize this, and then you do something with it after that to destroy whatever. Kind of like, what was it, Byron and her marshmallows or whatever. We all do stuff like that, throwing stuff in the freezer to ice somebody up or something, and so it was a long. I would kind of wish that Three Sisters Center were still doing it, but my mentor had she had other fish to fry, other mushrooms to grow, and that kind of took precedence. But we try to reconstruct what we can of an environment, a learning environment within our own guild, but it unfortunately is just such a time-consuming process. But I haven't quite mastered it yet. So anyway, it takes years currently. All right. And if you can see the look of frustration on my face, it's there because I really wish that this were actually easier to accomplish, and that we actually had the time to accomplish it, because I don't want these traditions to die out. Plus, they are kind of expanding within the Urglaawe context, because some of the stuff we're pulling in from Hexerei isn't really known, because a lot of Braucherei practitioners won't talk to anybody who's going to write it down because they're tired of being labeled a Satanist. So let's see. Next question was, what was the immune system reference? It was several, couple of them. I think we had 3 runes that could be associated with autoimmune disorders, and depending on the type and the nature of the disorder, it's which rune you would use to apply to it. They're listed in the 3 runes are listed in the. Let's see. See any here? Okay. If there's any questions I'm missing. Can you please, is there anybody question that I haven't seen yet because it's kind of everything scrolled up? Can you please retype it into the chat now? I can't find them all. Right. Let's underscore this. Underscore. You do not have to know Braucherei or Hexerei at all to be an Urglaawe. Okay? Urglaawe is the religion. Braucherei and Hexerei are folk healing and magical practices. You'll probably still get exposure to some of it because much of our lore comes from those places, but they are not the same. Same with the runes. You can theoretically practice Urglaawe completely without ever using the runes at all, other than at the beginning of our rituals. But there is definitely a delineation. Urglaawe is a religion. Braucherei and Hexerei are not a religion. You will see some people claiming that powwow or Braucherei is their religion. That's more of a modern concept because most of the practitioners looked at themselves as Christian, and Braucherei was a tool alongside that, and Hexerei looked at themselves as like people of the earth or pagans or still nominal Christians or whatever, and Hexerei was their tool on the side. Is there anything else we're missing here? I feel like I was something I missed. Okay, I want to actually address the Appalachia, and there were degrees of root work. The funny thing about hoodoo is that hoodoo and Braucherei actually do have a connection. This is one of the things that we find interesting with talking with Byron Ballard, is because when the Scots-Irish settlers came through here, they were moving through our territories, and we actually did have some connections with one another and did share and exchange some information. Both groups had been exposed to some Native American practices as well. So there is a connection. And our sympathetic magic does seem to run fairly similar. Our energetic seems to be a little bit different, but having an understanding of hoodoo can give you some understandings of Braucherei. All right. Well. Okay. So everybody's no more questions left. Right. How about off that subject? Wait, hold on, before we do that. All right, so we'll pick up with the next runes in the next one. I'm gonna have to repost the PDF once I add more to it. We still have a ways to go. This is a complicated system, and but it's actual. There's like these handful of people that actually had this information. Provide some pretty good information, some confusing stuff. But so before our next Urglaawe Live, which I only want the rune stuff to be part of each one of these, and then we'll have another topic in there because the runes don't necessarily call to everybody. So I'll have to post that again. So how about topics other than this? Anybody have any quick questions for a couple minutes, or ideas, thoughts? Crickets. Alrighty, well, we'll end this now. So thank you very much, everybody. Yep. Thank you very much. I don't know when I'll schedule the next one for, but it'll probably be, probably midweek or something. I do find these to be I do find these to be pleasant because I'm an extrovert who's going stir crazy inside of an introverted environment, and so it's nice to be able to get out and talk. I think that we're going to still have our coffee clutch on Saturdays, um, which is just kind of generally hanging out. You can come and go in video as you please, and I guess our next ritual will be the tower one, which we still have to write. So thank you very much, everybody. Maxima Bessa, and have yourselves a pleasant night.